Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat with the dark fantasy author and tarot reader Julie Embleton about her life and career. Her English teacher Ann Creedon once told her to write what makes your heart sing, and these are the magic words that turned this voracious reader with a fantastic imagination into a writer. Julie was eventually able to pack up her full-time job a few years ago and concentrate on her passions, her writing and her tarot reading. She talks about her 12 books, about the world of self-publishing, how she develops the different characters, and she also explains how tarot reading works and how it finds its way into her stories. And finally, we talk about who might play one of the main characters when a movie is made based on her books. Let's hear from Julie. Julie Embleton, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's lovely to be here.
You're so welcome. And I think I'm up to, 320 episodes of the podcast. And it's the very first time I've had a dark fantasy author on the podcast and a tarot reader.
I'm honoured to be your first.
What's on your mind today?
Editing my book, and I moved venues for the premises where I hold meditation circles. I've moved to a new venue, and on my mind is that word gets out into the community so that people attend. That's what's on my mind today. And the windows of the house are filthy after all the wind and rain, and I need to get them cleaned.
Fair enough. So the practicality is alive.
Yes.
When we met first, and I know we had conversations, was it about a month ago? I thought, this is a very interesting woman with a very interesting background. And what I kind of love about your story is that you obviously were doing the things that we all end up doing, good, steady careers, but we've got a burning passion to do something else. And in many cases, that's never realized. But in your case, you made it happen. So I'd like the listeners to get to know you and that story and the work you do and how they can follow you and all that kind of thing. So my opening question is, who the hell are you and where did you come from?
So my name is Julie Embleton. I grew up in Rathfarnham, which is at the foothills of the Dublin Mountains. And I was a voracious reader as a child. My mum and dad used to read us bedtime stories. That would be my older sister and my younger brother. And I loved books, and I loved the escapism of books. And once I was old enough to cycle to the local library, I was down there 2-3 times a week. I know there was one summer where I was down there almost every day, and the librarians used to laugh at me because I came in and out so often. I just loved books. I loved reading. I had no intention of becoming an author at that stage. My interest was art. And once I went into secondary school and realised that you could go to college and get a degree doing art all day, I just thought, this is it. I'm made up now. So I applied to NCAD and I got in, and I did a 4-year degree course and came out of that with a degree in graphic design, which I never used. I promptly left Ireland, I think the day after my degree show, because while I had been in college, I was travelling to the Isle of Man at every available opportunity to work in hotels over there because I needed the money to pay for fees and, to get on as a student. And I fell in love with hotel life. I was working in the bars and I was doing conferencing and things like that. So I promptly left Dublin after I got my degree, spent a couple of years in the Isle of Man, and then I moved to London. I stayed in London for, I think, maybe 1.5 to 2 years. I can't quite remember. I was with Hilton at the time, and then I moved back to Dublin. They were opening a new hotel in Dublin. And all in all, I was in hotel management for about 13 years. Then I got married and I had my daughter, and I knew at that stage that staying in hotel management at least, wasn't going to be an option for me because the hours were bonkers. And I really wanted to, have a better routine for my daughter. So I ended up moving to an admin role in I don't know if I'm allowed to say the name of the company. I won't say it. I moved to an admin and sort of accounting role within a company, part-time. I had no intention of staying part-time. I wanted full-time, but that's all that was available when I applied for the job. And 18 years later, I was still with them. I ended up working in HR. So then I think it was March 2021, while we were all still working from home, word came in that we were being made redundant. My team and I were being made redundant from this company. And at that stage, I had been writing for, I'd say, maybe 11 or 12 years. And I had been tarot reading for probably 8 or 9 at that stage too. And these were things that I did in my own time that I just loved. And all of a sudden, I had this opportunity where I was being given a very generous financial cushion, and I thought, well, it's now or never. And it was one of those moments where one of the very first card in the tarot deck is the Fool. And it's a picture of a young man leaping off a cliff, and he's a little white dog at his heels, and he's a knapsack over his shoulder. And the theme behind the Fool is new adventures, it's innocence, it's taking a leap of faith. So I really took a massive leap of faith, and I just went, no, I have this money. This is the best and probably only chance I'll get to do this. At that stage, I had published maybe 9 or 10 books. I can't quite remember the count, but I wanted to do it full time. So I said, here we go. And that's what I did. I turned what had been a very simple, at the time, it was simply just write my books and publish them. And I turned that and my tarot reading into 2 very busy full-time businesses. And here I am in 2024, wondering what possessed me.
And that love of books, where did that come from? Was that something from your mum and dad, or was that something all of your own?
Well, I think because my mum and dad read to us so much when we were kids, we were introduced to the worlds that came within the pages of a book and all these different stories and people. And I have a very active imagination. My brain does not stop. And really, when I was in my teenage years, that's when I started behaving as a writer, in terms of I had so many stories in my head that I literally had to transfer them from my brain onto paper because I couldn't think straight and my head was that busy. So I think it was just there from a young age, just a great imagination. I used to play out in the garden and imagine all sorts of worlds were being built around me. So, yeah.
Yeah. What kind of books were you reading?
When I look back, mainly fantasy. My sister, who's a couple of years older than me, told me that the very first book I took out from the library by my own choosing, as opposed to my mum handing me a book, was a book about a ghost. I don't remember that, but she does. I read a lot of Nancy Drew. I loved Nancy Drew. And I read a lot of Enid Blyton, Famous Five. I read a lot what Katie did at school. And then as I got older, I read a lot of the classics. I love Dickens. I love Bronte, Wuthering Heights, all of those, Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility. I think my favourite book of all is Great Expectations. I read that at least once a year.
Oh, wow. And what does that book do for you?
It's the language that the language is just so beautiful. And I love the story of Great Expectations. I loved how, Dickens built such amazing atmosphere. But for me, when I read them as an author, it's the language that just really tickles me every time. Obviously language changes over the centuries, and even in the likes of Wuthering Heights, when Heathcliff and Cathy are fighting, their language is just so beautiful, even though they're in the throes of it and they want to kill each other. It's just so beautiful.
So were you the quiet kid in the corner, always with their face stuck behind a book when all the kids were out playing? Or were you a bit of a loner? Or?
I wouldn't say I was a loner as a kid, because I did play outdoors a lot, but I was definitely very introverted, and I would be the same today.
It's quite interesting because we have a client which is MS Readathon, which I'm not sure if you ever did that program as a kid or whatever, but it's basically to encourage children to read books. And there's like a challenge about reading books. And of course, there's a multiple sclerosis. So there's obviously a connection with a charity, you know, that you get sponsored to read so many books and all that kind of thing. And many people would say book reading for children, and obviously with the advent of, you know, digital devices and everything, is something that's fading. In your own experience, and you're obviously a mum, and what you observe around you, is book reading as popular now, do you think, as it once was?
I don't think so. I purposely read to my daughter when she was very young because I wanted her to enjoy what I had enjoyed as a kid. I saw as she got older, so when she was 12 or 13 and it was all about YouTube and the phones and the tablets and all of that, at that stage, my sister and I were devouring the weekly comics we'd get from our local newsagents, you know, Bunty, and I can't even remember the names of them now, Tracy, all those magazines. And we were still visiting the library. I think it's just different for kids these days. There's different things to capture their attention. I think the art of reading is fading. But then there's other people who will tell you that it is coming back. I think it's possibly more popular now with maybe young adults and up than it would have been when I was that age.
Yeah.
I feel when I was that age and I was in college and I was heading out into the world and working, I didn't have time for reading. It wasn't something I did. Phones and the internet weren't even around back then, I don't think. But it wasn't. Whereas now I see on social media, the likes of TikTok and Instagram, it seems the book community has quite a strong following of people in their sort of 20s, 30s. That is a slight shift, I think, in the book reading world.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to have 3 grandchildren, and as of this moment in time, just one really would be of a reading age. Little Hazel, she's just 3. And when we're lucky enough to spend time with her and they stay overnight and that, Granddad always has to read her a book. I'm amazed actually how tuned in she is to the books and the characters, and at times, you know, knowing words that you wouldn't expect her to know, and seeing the nuances about the different characters and all that kind of thing. And at the same time, I do see as well, if you put a screen in front of them, wow, talk about that screen just zapping her attention from everything else. You could do a song and a dance and, you know, you could make funny faces and start screaming. She would not hear you. The outside world just disappears once she locks into that screen. But anyway, it's a little bit of a different world. The Julie who had that career in the hotels and hotel management and HR and admin and all of that, that person functioning in the world with a burning passion and an interest in other things alongside it, can you even relate to that person now?
I can, because I remember so clearly the frustration of leaving the house on, I used to work 3 days midweek, Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, I think. Leaving the house on a Tuesday morning, the alarm going off at 5:10, and the long commute from where I live to where my office was. It was about an hour and a half commute, and driving and thinking this is such a shocking waste of time, because I used to spend about 9 hours a week commuting, and I always equated that into chapters or words, and I was like, that would be 2 chapters.
Yeah.
But that could be, you know, 9 hours of editing or whatever. And the frustration of having to move out of, I call it the in-between. So when I'm writing, I kind of disconnect from reality and I'm totally obviously in the world I'm creating. I call that the in-between. It's the same when I'm reading tarot. And to have to come out of that in-between and return to the adult world and be professional and, you know, work, I used to find that frustrating because I wanted to spend my time writing. My work that I did, I worked with some great people, and to a certain extent, my work, I got some satisfaction from it, but it certainly did not set my soul on fire. And I was always very relieved when the 3 days work were up and I could return home to doing what I wanted to do, what I was really passionate about. So now, you know, people say to me, oh, the one thing you should never do is something along the lines of turn your hobby into your career or something like that. And I disagree, because I wake up every morning with a grin on my face, and it sounds cheesy. I'm sure there's listeners out there rolling their eyes at me, but I do. I can't say that since I've started this, that I've worked a single day. I don't feel like it's work. I'm following my passion, and it's just, I feel so lucky to be in this position. Now, I work hard, don't get me wrong, and it's taken a lot of blood, sweat and tears to get where I am today. But I feel that I'm fortunate to be in this position. So I do remember that, Julie. I do remember her frustration.
You pay a big price with your life, spending time at things that aren't you. Now, at the end of the day, we still need people to collect our bins and cook our food and drive the buses and all of those and, process our taxes, all of those jobs that might crack a lot of people up. But if you have any opportunity at all in your life to do the things that you're passionate about, they're the lovely ingredients for winning happy, I think. And that's kind of the essence of the podcast. In terms of your writing and the encouragement of that and that opening that door for you, who's responsible for that?
A teacher, an English teacher of mine from secondary school. And I think I was possibly in maybe second or third year. I can't quite remember. And her name is Ann Creedon. Unfortunately, we were the pre-internet era. There's no way of tracking Ann Creedon down, but she did a section at school with us on creative writing, where we spent months learning how to write essays and construct stories. And I couldn't wait for us to start doing this. And one of the very first essay I wrote for her was called Friday the 13th. And it was about two teenagers who decided to take part in an experiment to see were all the superstitions surrounding Friday the 13th true. Was there any basis in them? And they did things like walking under ladders and smashing mirrors and so on. And one girl who had a sort of a healthy, respectful, superstitious belief in these things ended up having amazing things happen to her. Whereas the guy that thought the whole lot was a whole load of tosh had terrible things happen to him. And I had so much fun writing the essay. I loved it. And it turned out the day after, I wasn't in school for whatever reason. And the following morning, as I was on my way to school, people from my class were coming up to me and saying, "Oh, Mrs. Creedon read out your essay yesterday. It was brilliant. It was brilliant." And I was like, whoa, okay. And when I got into class, then Mrs. Creedon pulled me aside and said to me that the essay was really good. And, she had some other words for me. The thing that stands out the most is she said to me, "Did you enjoy writing it?" And I said, "I loved every second. I want to do it. I want to just write essays all the time." And she said, "Well, write." She said, "Just keep writing." And she said, "Write what makes your heart sing." And that stuck with me ever since. Write what makes your heart sing. And I took that with me. Again, even at that age, I had no intention of becoming an author. It was something I did. It was far more entertaining for me to write down the stories in my head than write the rotten Irish essays that I always left till 7:00 on a Sunday night. And I had no intentions of becoming an author, but I just loved the art of putting the words in my head down onto paper. And to this day, every book I write, there's a character in it somewhere that has the name Creedon, a character or a name as a nod to Mrs. Creedon, because she was such an inspiration to me. And she doesn't, I'm sure she doesn't even know, she probably doesn't even remember me, but that's my little nod to Mrs. Creedon. And of course, my parents as well were very supportive. I think it's a Coldplay lyric that says, "I'd rather be a comma than a full stop." And I think to this day, I definitely would say I'm more of a comma than a full stop in terms of everything, all the different careers I've moved through. But my parents have always been so supportive of my writing and very encouraging. And anything I turn around and say, "Oh, I'm doing this now," and they go, "Oh, that's great. Good for you."
And, writing an essay for school, that's a task that you've been assigned. When was the first time you actually wrote something that wasn't a task by someone? It was just a task that you had assigned yourself?
When the Lost Boys movie came out with Kiefer Sutherland and Jason Patric, and I had never, ever read a story or seen a movie like it. And it blew my brains off. I just was, wow. And I couldn't get the story out of my head. And I started to make my own stories around this idea of, these lost boys, these vampires. And I filled copybook after copybook with my own stories all around vampires and werewolves. And that's, I think, really then when my passion for dark fantasy really began to explode.
And were you sharing those with other people, or was it just for you?
No, I don't even know if they're still around. I know there was a box in my parents' attic, and I know those copybooks were in it, but I don't think they're there now. And if they were, I'd cringe to read them. But no. It was just for me, nobody else. Nobody had a clue I was writing.
Okay. And this time I'm writing a book proper, and other people are going to read it because I'm going to publish it and put it out there. From the minute you made that decision to that actually happening, but was there a big gap between those two things?
It was around Christmas 2009, I think. My daughter was young at the time, and we were still reading bedtime stories. And over Christmas, the library was closed and she ran out of books, and she asked me to tell her a story instead of reading her one, make up a story. So I made up a story about a little girl who discovers fairies at the bottom of her garden. And she asked me would I write it out so that she could draw pictures to go along with it. And I thought, yay, this is a great thing to do over Christmas. So I started writing it and realized it's actually very difficult for me to write children's story because the language has to be a lot simpler. And obviously there can't be dark themes in it. And once I started back in writing again, because I hadn't for maybe 12 or 15 years while I had been living in London and, being a mom and all of that. And once I started writing, I just was like, wow, I really miss this. And at some stage over that Christmas holiday, I had a very vivid dream. It was very short, but very vivid. And I woke up the following morning and I had this whole story in my head. And I said, okay, I haven't written in so long. I'm going to just put this down now and see what happens. And I had it written by April 2010. And it was around about that time that Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series came out. And I remember reading an article about how she was a stay-at-home mum. She had 2 young boys, I think, at the time. And she too had a dream about a scene in the book. And she put together this book, again, with no intention of ever showing anybody. And she gave it to somebody to read. And they said, no, this is amazing. And I thought, okay, well, if she can do that, so can I. And later that year, I got signed up with a literary agent. And unfortunately, it wasn't his main bread and butter. He had fingers in many pies, and the business relationship between us broke down. Ebooks were really only starting to hit the market at that stage. And one of the reader apps that was available and that was very new was Wattpad. And the idea with Wattpad is that you publish maybe a chapter at a time, and your readers can be really vocal about what they think or don't think about it. And I was mad keen to start putting my work up on Wattpad because I wanted real-time interaction. I wanted people's comments. I wanted to know if what I was writing was a pile of pants or worth pursuing. And my agent at the time was totally against it. There was still quite a negative relationship, between traditional publishers and those trying to publish independently. And it was a really tricky time for me, but I pushed through because I really felt that what I had written was somebody would want to read it. So I ended up finishing the contract with the literary agent, and I started self-publishing on Wattpad for maybe a few months, and then I took it to Amazon. So all in all, in this really long-winded way of answering your question, I would say maybe a year kind of passed when I made that decision to actually physically start writing properly again. And then I think a year later, the book was available to read. And from there, then it grew legs.
Was that scary?
It was at the beginning. And, when I realized that this is very serious, and when you publish a book, people do actually read it, I would sometimes still have moments before I go to hit publish where I have that, I suppose, that imposter syndrome where I go, who do you think you are? Seriously, Embleton, like, who do you think you are? But I'm getting ready to publish my 12th book, and that has faded a lot.
Yeah. There's a beautiful song by Jack O'Rourke. It's called Opera on the Top Floor. And it's about a character who worked in a pub. It was called Mick the Pies in Listowel down in Kerry. And it was a venue, so a lot of the musicians used to go there. And this particular character who worked there, just a guy behind the bar doing his thing, meeting and greeting the different bands, looking after them, I don't know, giving them their few sandwiches or their drinks and cleaning up after. And everyone knew him. Everyone knew this particular character. And this man passed away very sadly. And I think he was living above the pub. And when they went to his room, they discovered that this man was living in a totally different world. So the song is Opera on the Top Floor. They realised he was a huge opera fan with lots of posters and everything. So the song is absolutely amazing. And there's a beautiful animated video to go with it of this guy sweeping the floors, and suddenly he's, sailing into the sky, listening to all his fantastic music in that particular song. So your pals in admin and HR and hotel management, did they know this other character? Did they know that, oh, by the way, I just published my first book this week?
No, certainly not when I was in hotel management, because at that stage I was writing, but for myself. When I was working in HR, a few people knew, not many. It just wasn't the kind of environment where you shared that you had a life out of work, because work was supposed to be your whole life.
Okay, yeah.
It was that kind of a culture at the beginning when I was working there. So no, I kept it to myself. And there was a touch of shyness about it too, because I was always afraid that somebody would read what I'd written and go, that's the greatest pile of pants. And, obviously that would be really difficult for me to take back then. I was 18 years with the company. So towards the end, people who I was close with, my really good working colleagues, they knew I was writing. And a few of them knew that I was reading tarot as well.
In terms of editing and someone looking over your shoulder and saying that's good or that's not good or you should do this differently, was there anyone, or was this all you learning, reading reader comments and all that kind of thing?
It's all me. I have, full transparency here, to pay for an editor is really, really costly. I think the first book I looked to have edited, it's a very large book. And at the time I was quoted almost €7,000 to have it edited. And I do not have that kind of money. I certainly didn't have it back then. But I did pass it to people who I knew were voracious readers and had a really good grasp on literature and language. And I got some really great feedback from them. I think my years of reading as well helped too. Yeah. And, there's great software out there now. There's Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid. And these are great software packages that you can put your writing into. And we'll point out the really obvious stuff like typos, but it will also highlight things like too many verbs or too many adverbs or, sentence structure and all that kind of thing. So I learned as I went along, because, one of the first books I published, I looked back on it there, maybe, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. And yeah, I wasn't happy with it. And I went back and re-edited it. And as an author, it's like any kind of artist thing. You could fiddle with your piece just forever. You could just keep fiddling, keep making tweaks. And that was a skill I had to learn, when to step away and just stop fiddling. But I do it all myself. I do all my own, obviously the book covers I get done professionally. I do pay for that. But when I have more revenue to be able to hand over, I will certainly look at getting an editor. But it's a very, very costly thing right now. And it wouldn't pay me if, my book sales are doing really well. But to justify thousands and thousands of euro to have it edited at this stage wouldn't make sense for me.
Yeah. And is the writing in book 12 quite different to the writing in book number 1?
It would be, yes. Yeah. My voice has certainly changed over the years. And from reading, I read so much too. I've learned what I love as a reader in a book. So I bring that into my own writing.
Tell me about your favourite characters.
Strong female leads are definitely my favourites. I like the women that can kick ass and take control. That I'm not anti-man, not by any means at all, but I do love a strong female lead. That's what I really enjoy. And I've read a lot of books over the years where the females are portrayed as very weak and totally reliant on the male characters in the book. And that's just personally, it's just not my thing. So all of my female characters are typically very strong individuals.
Yeah, and it's obviously dark fantasy, but are there people that you know in the different characters? And is Julie in any of the characters?
No, definitely not. I wish I was that exciting or that mysterious or that powerful. No, definitely not. No. Are there people? No, there aren't. There are situations maybe in my life I might pull into a scene or traits of maybe somebody's character, but there's definitely not one character I would say, oh, that's based on that person. I've heard names over the years. I love names, and I'd often hear a name, whether it be, through conversation or read it or hear it. And I love names, and I'd associate names with characteristics. So I would sometimes pull a certain person's name and go, yeah, I'll use that.
Yeah. Do they ever find out after that, yeah, there was some connection to me in that book? No?
No, I don't think it would ever be. I don't think I've ever written, I haven't written a character that would have such a strong connection to somebody that they could go, oh, that's definitely me.
And I know from your website that you've got a number of different series going on. Do you get tired of a character suddenly and that means, okay, now I need to create a new series and introduce new ones? Do characters run their course?
No, it's actually really hard to finish a series. I have a trilogy, and then I have another series that has 6 books in it. And ending that 6-book series, which is the Turning Moon series, so that it has a lot of vampires and werewolves and witches. And that was actually a really difficult series to close out, to the point where I actually think I will pick it up again at a future date. The trilogy, which is a sort of a medieval contemporary epic fantasy style, again, those characters these were the characters that came out of that dream I had at Christmas 2009. So again, it was very hard to say goodbye to them. And right now I've started a new series. I published the first book of it in Halloween last year. And there, I'm exploring all these new characters are in my head now. And I think it'll be a while before I'm ready to let any of them go. Because they really do get into my head. And when I'm writing the very first draft of a book, I'm what's called a bit of a pantser when it comes to writing. So I don't plot. I wouldn't have chapter 1, this happens, chapter 2, this happens. I would kind of go, needs to happen at some stage, and that needs to happen, and this might be the ending. I just start at whatever scene is in my head that has me the most excited, and I build it from there. But the characters at the moment, because it's a new series, I wrote the first draft and then I go back to do it as a second draft and I go, oh, no. There's no way she would actually have said that there, because I've got to know them better over time. And, they'd almost even speak in my head and say, I actually wouldn't do that. I would do this instead. And then I go, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, you would actually. Yeah. So they get into my head and it's very hard to let them go. And people often ask me, have I a favorite character? And that's like asking, have you a favorite child? Yeah. It's not really possible to pick one.
Everyone has a favorite child, Julie.
I only have one, so yes, she's my absolute favorite. Out of all my children, she's the best.
Yeah, so you don't have a book structured with, your chapters and you build them one by one, the end before you even begin. You let it flow, do you?
Oh, yes, let it flow. So for the trilogy, the epic fantasy trilogy, I had absolutely zero idea how I was going to end that. And there's close to 500,000 words between those 3 books. And I think it was probably when I got to the last 3 or 4 chapters before I figured out how I was going to end it. But it never makes me panic. I don't fret over it because I know it's going to come to me. The inspiration will be there, or I'll dream it, or I'll hear it, or I just like to kind of go with the flow. And that's really for me where the magic happens. I know some authors love the structure and they love to know exactly what they're doing. My process is far more fluid than that.
And is it one book at a time?
No.
Oh, God.
It's not, no. So I'm preparing to publish my 12th one. I was hoping to publish it at Halloween, but thankfully the other side of my business has got so busy that I'll have to delay that. And I am writing the next book in that series. I already have a really good idea and have some scenes written for that. And the book after that. And there's also another book that I'm writing that will probably be standalone that I've written quite a large portion of as well. So I tend to hop, and it depends on where my motivation or inspiration is lying. There are times when I'll hit pause on what I'm writing because I need to let stuff percolate, or I read it and I just go, yeah, it's not doing it for me. I just need to go away and leave it sit there for a little while. And while I'm doing that, I might write something else. And then, I'll go back to it.
And does it torture you at times when you've got this idea that's just on fire, but you have to complete the other one? Needs must.
Can be, yes, yeah, it can be. Or it's more when there's some days where I write, and I know there's other authors would agree with me on this, where you're just so in the flow and I'm writing and I'm going, where is this coming from? My God, I'm on fire today. And then something will happen. I'll have to go and, be the taxi mom, or, I have to get up and use the bathroom, or something that pulls me away from the keyboard. And that's torture, because typically when I return, I've broken the connection and it's hard to get back into that. And then there's other days you sit down and it's like, there was a tree, there was a girl, the sky was blue. And on those days, it's just, okay, step away for a little while, go do something else.
Does it become work sometimes?
The last few edits, yes, I get so sick of reading what I've written. I'm sick of it. And the trouble then is that I know the book pretty much off by heart. So my eyes skip over the words. So the very last editing process I do is text to speech, where it's read out to me in a very robotic voice and quite slowly, and it forces me to read each word. By then I'm sick of it, and that's the part I least enjoy. The first and second drafts are my absolute favourite.
Okay.
And then once the editing, it could be 5, 6, 7 sweeps of the book, and it doesn't matter how many software programs I put it through, how many text to speeches. It doesn't matter. Every single time I'll hit publish, and a week later I'll come across a typo or an error, and I'll just be like, yeah, there's the punch to the stomach.
And people are listening to an awful lot of books these days, Julie. Are there audible versions of any of your books?
There are. So my Turning Moon series is in audio. There's a standalone, which is a dystopian romance called Rogue Assassin. That's also an audio. And then Moonstone and Mugwort, which is the book I published last year, has come out in audio in the last couple of months. And that was narrated by an Irish narrator called Caroline Kane, and she did an amazing job on it, because Moonstone and Mugwort is set in Ireland, and I specifically wanted a native Irish person, to narrate it for me, and she did an amazing job. The trilogy, the epic fantasy trilogy, is not yet in audio.
Yeah,
but I will. It's on the to-do list.
So you won't lend your voice to any of them, will you?
I am thinking about it.
Okay.
I'm thinking about it. It's a huge time suck. That's probably the only thing that would put me off it. But I am thinking about it. I'd love to try it just for the experience, because as the author, I know all the nuances. You can't explain everything to a narrator. And while they do an amazing job, I've had 2 fantastic narrators, thankfully. There are, as the author, I know that these people have been living in my head for over a decade. So I know exactly how I want them to sound.
And the world of tarot running parallel to all of this. Can you talk to me about that and how that began?
Well, I think probably from my years of reading as a teenager, I would have read a lot of fantasy and, books about witches and tarot, and all that kind of thing would have been stewing in my brain. And for a long time, I had, a very skewed view on what tarot was. And it was something that I was quite afraid of. I just thought, oh no, you wouldn't want to mess around with tarot cards. It's, I was very interested in them, but I wouldn't have attempted to read them. And one Christmas, my dad actually gave me a tarot deck, which he has no recollection of. He doesn't even remember it, but I do. It's the very first tarot deck I was given, and I was really surprised by it. And I just thought, does he know I like this stuff? Is this why he gave it to me? I was confused by it, but again, I didn't know what to do with them, and I put them in the back of a drawer. And then fast forward a few years, I had some tarot readings over the years that were given to me. And eventually my understanding of tarot shifted to a far more positive one. And I took a 6-week course way back. I think it was 2014, maybe. And I learned how to read tarot. And from there, it just expanded. And I realized what an amazing tool it is, and how I'll always be a student. I don't think you'll ever master tarot. It'd be impossible.
So how should it work?
Well, there are 78 cards in a deck, and each card has its own traditional meaning. For me, as an intuitive tarot reader, when I sit down to do a reading for somebody, say, for example, now you came to me and said you wanted a reading about your career, let's say, I would lay out the cards. I would shuffle and lay them out, and I would see what the traditional meanings are delivering, what messages are there. But then I would connect to my intuition. I would work a lot with claircognizance and clairsentience, which is feeling and knowing when I'm reading tarot. And so I would get intuitive hits, for want of a better word, that would really expand the reading and get a lot deeper. And then, it's like lots of little invisible threads start to weave their way throughout the cards. Different images, symbols, figures, colors, all these kind of things will jump out at me. And from there, I'll get a much bigger picture than the cards themselves would have just shown sort of at face value.
So can we do a tarot reading? Not now, but can we do one for the podcast?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I'd love to.
Okay, that would be really interesting. And that obviously weaves into the book and opens up ideas and all of that.
Yes, yeah. So, originally the Turning Moon series, when I wrote it, there is a witch character in it, but I didn't explore tarot within that book. And then when I was writing the Coveted Powers series, which is the trilogy, the medieval contemporary trilogy, there was a lot of sword and sorcery themes in that, but tarot didn't come into it. And I made a very conscious decision when I started this latest series, Oath and Legacy it's called, that I really wanted to bring tarot into it. I've read many books and seen many films over the years, like I'm sure many people have. And you have that scene where the gypsy Rose Lee in her lovely caravan with all her bangles and scarves, and she flips over the death card, and it's like, and the truth of the matter is that the death card is one of the nicest cards in tarot because it's about transformation. And I just wanted to bring more truth about tarot into my books and for people to see how amazing it is as a tool, in everyday life and any kind of situation. So I made a conscious decision that I wanted to weave it more into my stories going forward, for the time being anyway, for this series definitely.
Yeah, but it's woven into your profession as well. Like, this is one of the things that you do. So I saw it listed on your bio, whatever, that you're a professional tarot advisor. What does that look like, at a practical level? How does that work?
Well, people will come to me with whatever their query is, and I'll sit down and do the reading. And from there, I don't just read and say, there you go, thanks very much, off trot now. I like to work with people and say, okay, these are your next steps. This is what you need to look at doing next. And I encourage people to, we're all in control of our own lives. And I think people are fearful of tarot because they think that the cards are going to predict something awful. And the truth of the matter is that even if I did a reading for you right now and it said, right now, today, it looks like your career is hitting a wall. But you're the one in control of your life. You control your destiny. It's not a piece of printed card lying on a table that controls you. So you make a decision and you go home and you go, yeah, I actually know exactly why my career is about to hit a wall because I've made X, Y, Z decisions and I need to change and do this. And they're the kind of things that I would discuss in readings with clients. I do a lot of readings for creative people, so artists, authors. I read a lot for people who work in the holistic wellness field as well. So business owners, people who are struggling maybe with making a decision about which way to take their business, people who are having challenges with their colleagues or their work partners. And, I'm very much in belief that if I haven't sent somebody away from a reading with clarity and hope, I have failed. I've had tarot readings over the years personally. I've sat opposite a tarot reader and I've gone in with something that's really had me down. And I know the feeling of walking away and suddenly feel like a major weight has been lifted off my shoulder. And it's that ability to suddenly lift your head and look forward and say, I see the way I need to go now. And I can't quite see the destination. It's still over the horizon. I'm not too sure how I'm going to get there, but I know the first few steps I need to take. And all of that is woven in when I'm reading, regardless of the subject, regardless of what issue the client has brought to me.
Yeah. And that direction was mapped out to you at some point, was it, at one of your readings?
Yes, over the years, I've had a few readings that have always pointed at success with my writing. And I've had many tarot readers saying to me, you should be doing this too. So, here I am. But it was a very conscious decision on my part to start taking up tarot. I didn't go, I better do it because the card said so.
Yeah. So the good tarot reader, they're obviously doing something more than just flipping cards.
I feel that there's a lot of, from my own experience, when people sit across from me, they're placing themselves in a very vulnerable position because they're sharing with a stranger a problem that they have in their life. And it's very humbling to sit opposite somebody and know that they trust you enough to tell you this, and that they're going to sit there and listen to your, the advice that's coming through the reading, through my own intuitive hits and through the cards. Yeah, I'm not really too sure what to say to the rest of that.
That's okay. Well, I'm definitely going to come to you, and we might do it for the podcast, which might be very interesting. Will we see any of your books as a movie, do you think?
Oh, I'd love that. It's funny, when I started writing first, the big goal was always to get picked up by a traditional publisher. That was it. You'd made it if, Penguin or Simon & Schuster, somebody picked you up. And that has changed so much in the last 10 years. I know authors, independent authors, who were given contracts with traditional publishing houses and pulled out and went back to indie publishing. The big thing now is to get up on Netflix or Prime or the likes of Passion Flicks or any of those. And yes, obviously the movie deals, everybody wants the J.K. Rowling dream to come true. I'd hope so. I'd love it, of course. I think the storylines would translate really well to screen.
Yeah.
But I'm not a screenwriter or a filmmaker, so I would definitely probably stand corrected on that.
Well, my son is a filmmaker. Maybe I should get you to talk to him.
Oh, there's a connection.
Yeah. So if we let your imagination run wild and you picked one of your books, have you actually thought about casting it already? Do you have the actors chosen?
I do. I think probably because so much time has passed since I started writing my very first series, those actors wouldn't fit now because they would be older, and the characters in the books are younger. One of my characters is a sorcerer. His name is Solomon. He's in the contemporary medieval trilogy, and he's a very wise figure. And I always picture Liam Neeson playing him. I think he would make an excellent Solomon. And other than that, it would change. Sometimes I could be watching a movie or a series and see somebody and go, oh, they play my character, whichever one, really well. But I think Liam Neeson is the only one that I would pick. At this moment, I could say with confidence.
Get ready for that phone call from the casting agent.
Yes. I'll be ringing and going, hey, Liam, what are you doing next year? I have a job for you.
That's a good plan. How can people get in touch with you?
You can find me through my website, which is julieembleton.com, and that's for my books. And then for the tarot side of things, it's creativesoultarot.com. And I have all my social media links available through my websites as well.
Okay, brilliant. What's happiness to you, Julie?
So I knew you were going to ask me this question. And at first I thought I'm going to have to write a really profound answer to this now. And over the last week, as I was going through my days, for me, happiness is many small little things. Sharing lunch with my parents yesterday, waking up this morning and finding the cat had snuck up to my room during the night and her little cold nose was on my cheek. Sitting down with a cup of tea in the evening with chocolate biscuits to watch something on Netflix. It's those little moments, but I think what ties them all together is connection. Conversations with friends, time with family, connecting with nature. I was out walking this morning and it was very cold, but it was beautiful. It was a really crisp morning and it was just so lovely crunching through the leaves where I was walking. So I think connection weaves it together for me, but it's connection to all sorts of different things. Connection to my friends and family, connection to my work, connection to, even when I sit and meditate, that connection that I make. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really funny. We were invited for dinner last Sunday. So we have a little summer house down in Crookhaven, and there's a lovely couple from England, Bernard and Angela. And they invited us for dinner very early in the afternoon. There was two of our lovely neighbours, Jim and Mary O'Mara, came as well. And I was there and Dee was there and Bernard and Angela's dog was there, waiting for scraps off the table. And we just sat down and, the food was being presented on the table. And it was just that lovely feeling of us all together. I don't know any of them terribly well or anything like that, but it was just a lovely feeling of being together. Obviously, we were lucky that we were enjoying great food, and there was no big deal about the conversations. It was just a feeling. It was just a lovely. I remember thinking the most special thing about this thing that we're experiencing right now is that feeling. In terms of winning, so you obviously love writing your books and you love tarot. You didn't like all the admin and the computing and all that thing too much. And I always have this analogy that you might love playing football, but without goalposts, it might be a little bit pointless. And when you do get a goal, you put the ball in the back of the net, that moment of elation. What are those wins for you now, those yay moments, What delivers that for you?
So with my tarot, I would say when a client stands up from the table and I can see the change in them from when they arrived, when they cry, like there's a release of emotion, and they can be good tears and they can be sad tears. But that's a win for me because, again, it's that connection piece where I have connected with them and we have come up with a solution or a way forward. And it's knowing that they're leaving, as I said before, with clarity and with hope. With my books, it's when, somebody reaches out to me and says, I was up till 3:00 in the morning. I loved your book. I burnt the dinner. I couldn't do the ironing, whatever. I just love that. And when I get good reviews, I don't always look at my reviews, but when somebody reaches out to say, here, I've just posted a review, that's always really good. But for me, I think winning is a lot of it too is when I get into bed at night and I lie there and I think back on my day and I know I've done something that to me is worthwhile in terms of growing my business, but also in enhancing and enriching the connections I have in my life in all different ways. My friends, my family, my connection with nature, my connection with my pets, all of that. So yeah, that's winning for me. And yes, of course, seeing great book sales is superb and seeing great reviews is fantastic. And meeting new clients and having new clients come to me for readings is, I'm always very, very grateful. But I think it is the small thing. And that's the stuff you don't bring with you. But the emotion lives in your heart. And that's what keeps me going on the days where I wonder, am I completely bonkers doing what I do?
That's fantastic. If I asked you to pick a best day ever, could you come up with one for me?
The day my daughter was born, I'm going to say that. But up until then, I thought I knew what love was, unconditional love. And then those moments when I held her, she was all slippery and warm and she looked up at me with her big blue eyes. And I just thought, wow, I genuinely did not have a clue what unconditional love was until I saw her for the first time. So that would probably be one of the most, happiest, profound moments of my life.
Wow. Julie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been lovely to chat to you.
I learned an awful lot about you, and so did the listeners. Well done, and thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.